Season 2 of The Mandalorian came with many unexpected treats, perhaps the most surprising of which being the reintroduction of the Imperial Dark Trooper. Dark Troopers, which first appeared in the 1995 game Star Wars Dark Forces, were a staple of the old expanded universe, and it was great to see them finally get some screen time. The Mandalorian series finale made Dark Troopers into the terror that anyone who's played Dark Forces knows them to be, at least until a certain someone showed up. This depiction becomes all the more striking when you put the Dark Troopers into context as battle droids. We're used to thinking of battle droids as frail and useless, though these Dark Troopers were anything but. So, what gives? In this video, we'll be answering that question and talking about what made the Dark Troopers the nightmarish battle droids the Separatists were afraid to make.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Dark Troopers as a concept are quite similar between Legends and canon, but there are enough discrepancies between the two that we're going to address Legends and canon Dark Troopers separately. Most of what we know of the Dark Troopers in canon comes from The Mandalorian, which establishes them as incredibly resilient, unrelenting, and virtually unstoppable for anyone who doesn't have a lightsaber. It also provides a little bit of insight on the Dark Trooper program. The ones we see in The Mandalorian are Phase 3 Dark Troopers, the first of the line to be full battle droids. Previous units were likely cyborgs or exosuits. In Legends, the Dark Trooper project was first conceptualized in the early years of the Empire, but it was kept in limbo for most of the Dark Times. Its goal was to create super soldiers for the Empire using droid technology, opponents that no rebel could stand against. The first Dark Troopers, the Phase 0 Dark Troopers, were aging clone veterans who had volunteered for cybernetic enhancement. Using technology similar to what had saved Darth Vader's life, they were reshaped into half-machine super soldiers equipped with jetpacks, arc casters, and their trademark black armor, and sent into battle alongside other stormtroopers. They weren't much better than the other stormtroopers, however, so for years, the Dark Trooper project went dormant. Most of the Imperial military forgot about the Dark Trooper project for a time. Most, but not all. A young Imperial officer named Rom Mock, who had worked on the project, remained committed to the idea of Imperial super soldiers. By the time of the Battle of Yavin, he had become a general, and as the Rebel Alliance became increasingly dangerous, his bid to revive the Dark Trooper project was finally greenlit. He took command of a massive science vessel called the Arc Hammer and got to work on the first true Dark Troopers. The Phase 1 Dark Troopers, the first product of Mock's project, were rather skeletal and were intended to test the basic concept of the Dark Trooper design. But while they appeared frail, this was far from the truth. Their skeletons were made of Frick, a lightsaber-resistant alloy previously used in Magna Guard electro staffs. They were also equipped with incredibly advanced artificial intelligences, and while they didn't have hands capable of carrying blasters, they did feature shields and vibro swords, which were grafted onto their frames. Phase 1 Dark Troopers proved effective in tests despite their limited nature, and so Mock moved on to the next stage of his project, Phase 2 Dark Troopers. Phase 2s were much larger and bulkier than Phase 1s, and this time around, they featured full Frick armor and built-in jetpacks. Special handheld assault cannons were designed for use by Phase 2 Dark Troopers. These fired high-powered plasma bolts and small missiles. Between their armor and their weapons, Phase 2 Dark Troopers were tanks on the battlefield. In their first field test on Talay, a single platoon cleared out an entire rebel base in a matter of hours, earning the personal approval of Darth Vader. After learning what had happened on Talay, Alliance High Command determined it was imperative that the Dark Trooper project be shut down. They deployed Kyle Katarn, otherwise known as the biggest Chad in the universe, to do the job. Katarn, a former stormtrooper turned rebel agent, was eventually able to track down the Dark Troopers back to the Arc Hammer, battling many of them along the way. Katarn was one of the rebellion's best fighters, but even he struggled to defeat these formidable battle droids. By the time Katarn had located the Arc Hammer, General Mock was working on the final step of the project, the Phase 3 Dark Trooper. This behemoth of a battle droid was nearly 3 meters tall, designed to be able to function either as an independent droid or as an exosuit for an organic. It was stronger, faster, and more heavily armed, equipped with a pair of integrated blaster cannons, 6 built-in rocket launchers, and improved versions of the assault cannon. If they had gotten past the prototype stage, they would have been the perfect infantry soldiers, capable of going one-on-one with tanks. Fortunately for the Rebel Alliance, Kyle Katarn made sure that very few Phase 3 Dark Troopers ever saw the light of day. Rom Mock himself integrated himself into the first prototype to battle Katarn aboard the Arc Hammer, and though he ended up losing the battle, it was a close call for Katarn. Katarn successfully destroyed the Arc Hammer, and with it, virtually all the equipment that had been used in the Dark Trooper project, leading to the project's termination. Across both Legends and Canon, the Dark Troopers share a number of common traits. Their armor can shrug off blaster fire like it's rain. They're tremendously strong and utterly relenting, and they come equipped with jetpacks and heavy-duty rifles. These battle droids were something to fear, even for Mandalorians and hardened veterans. Only the almighty Kyle Katarn, praise be upon him, had nothing to fear from these walking nightmares. So why didn't the Confederacy make its battle droids more like the Dark Troopers? They were definitely capable of doing so, at least to some degree. IG-100 Magna Guards had comparably sophisticated droid brains. Many existing droid models could match the physical strength of the Dark Troopers, and the Confederacy even owned Gromar 16, the moon where the Arc Hammer mined all of its frick. The Techno Union surely could have designed a droid of that caliber, and the mech worlds had the resources to mass produce them on a scale similar to that of the Droideka. So what gives? Well, firstly, the Dark Troopers clashed quite heavily with the combat philosophy of the Confederacy, so that was probably an obstacle. The CIS primarily employed swarm tactics, which worked quite well for much of the Clone Wars. Their tactical approach was to overwhelm the Republic. They poured their resources into obtaining a number of advantages at every level of warfare, from having greater numbers of basic infantry to having more warships and more war fleets. They didn't want to conquer the Republic, remember. They just wanted the Republic to let them secede, and they planned to force them to do so via a war of attrition. A weapon like the Dark Troopers wouldn't have suited for such a war. There was also the fact that they still probably wouldn't have been able to stand up to a Jedi. In the Mandalorian season finale, Luke Skywalker made mincemeat of those clankers, and most Jedi would surely have been able to put on similar shows. Imperial Dark Troopers wouldn't have been anywhere near as much of a threat, Legends or Canon, if the Jedi were still around to fight them. Seeing as the army the Confederacy was up against was led by a few thousand Jedi, something like the Dark Trooper project probably would have ultimately been futile. But there was another reason the CIS didn't make something like the Dark Troopers. A reason that terrified the CIS leadership. Highly advanced droids in small numbers are one thing, but a full army of Dark Troopers is another, and such a force would have come with extreme risks. Every droid army in the history of the Star Wars universe came with failsafes in case the droids went rogue, but such failsafes were harder to implement and guarantee the more advanced droids became. In the right conditions, droids could override their own programming and disable any failsafe hardware before their masters became aware of their rebellion, and then the meatbags would really be in trouble. This is part of why the Confederacy's battle droids were seemingly so dumb and why the rank and files featured very obvious flaws. The CIS wanted insurance against the threat of droid rebellion, so they deliberately nerfed their own armies. If Sith hit the fan, the flaws in the Confederacy's battle droids ensured it would at least have a chance of survival, but an army of Dark Trooper grade droids would have no such guarantees. If the Confederacy did have an army of Dark Troopers and they went rogue, only Count Dooku, General Grievous, and a handful of Dark Acolytes would have been able to stand against them. All the other meatbags would have been screwed. With the Separatist Council being the pack of gibbering cowards that it was, you can see why such a scenario didn't appeal to them. They were quite content with regular old battle droids, which they could make in such vast numbers that their quality made no difference. So that's what made the Dark Troopers the battle droids the Seppies were too scared to make. But what do you think? Did you enjoy seeing the Dark Troopers on screen at long last? Let us know that and your general thoughts on The Mandalorian Season 2 in the comment section below. And just before you run off guys, I've got some exciting news. we are opening another channel called The Braved that delves deep into the badasses of history from a whole lot of eras. So if that sounds like it's up your alley, then check out the first link in the description below. And if you just want to look for some music, check out our Relax Jack music channel. We use a lot of the music from that channel in our videos. So if you like the music in our videos, goes to say you should go check out that channel. And if you just want to join our wider community, check us out on our Geetzlies Gaming Network and our main Geetzlies Discord. Anyways guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.